if they decide to just go outside as well, or sometimes a director will just let a shot linger, and carry on, go, and the camera just has to follow. Um, Being able to just chuck a fur on it and follow that outside, and then you've gone from a rig that's set up for your indoor use, but in a matter of 15 seconds, you can go outside straight away. In which case, we're ahead of camera, which is always, you race a lot on set, and it's not necessarily, we're ahead of you, but part of the game is to have the answers before the questions, and that's something that I like to call it smooth department. So when those situations come up, we've already seen that the corner's coming, and we've already prepped for them.
Right, so today I'm joined by Simon Norman. So Simon, if you don't mind, thanks for joining us. Give us an introduction on where are you based out of? What kind of projects do you normally work on?
Hello, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Simon Norman. I'm a sound recordist and a production mixer based in West London. So I generally cover London as an area. Although being a location sound recordist, we go wherever we're required, depending on the project.
Yeah, so how did you actually get started in sound?
My story is a tale as old as time, if you will. It's pretty traditional. I took an education, or a higher education, in music technology in the early 2000s. And of course, that was the perfect time to get into learning about studio recording, because MP3s and home recording equipment came into the market. And as a result of that, lots of studios closed. So when I became available for a working opportunity sometime around like 2004, 2005, there was nowhere to work because all the studios had shut down. So I spent a number of years in the wilderness doing jobs that I didn't enjoy. And then eventually, after exiting one that was pretty low level and terrible, a bowling alley, I had to figure out a way to start actually doing a career that I enjoyed. So I spent some time looking at my, personality attributes, my character, things that I was interested in, stuff that makes sense to me. Also, my training, my skill sets, listed all those things, and then cross-referenced them. And one of is it the inferring points, or the cross points
Inflection point.
of those? Thank you very much. Inflection points was sound for film, because I had a lot of love for film. I'd spent a lot of time, being educated on how to record sound, understanding microphones, and around that period, I'd spent a lot of time doing electronic music live. So one of the other assets was being able to integrate very complex systems incredibly quickly in a scenario where you've got 15 minutes basically to set up an entire studio, and it can't fail. It has to work first time, for an hour flat. So all MIDI audio, insert cables, mixers, all that stuff, it just has to work. So after a lot of time doing that kind of stuff, I realized that my path to a career that I would enjoy would probably be well walked, going to film and broadcast sound, because that's my skill set. And I like movies. I like the process of creating things. So then I started nudging very, very slowly into this industry. And I'd say about 10, 15, maybe 18, 19 years now later, I think, here we are.
Yeah. So you weren't one of the few kids coming straight out of high school saying, I want to be a sound guy.
Oh, I came out of high school confused and had no idea what I was doing with myself. I did a media course straight after school, secondary school, as we have in England. And that exposed me, if you will, to, print media, film, video production, as it would be referred to back then. Sound, it was like the late 90s, but I remember we were taught how to actually cut tape with a razor blade. It was pretty much a dead format at that point, because everything was slowly transitioning to digital. But it was at that point, I got a chance to see all those different things and have a little taste on all those different variations of media production and media in general. I developed a taste and a desire to start making music. So that's where my initial or my original passion came from, buying synthesizers and samplers and making lots of noise and spending a lot of time learning about the basic structure of sound, which then led me to the aforementioned secondary education or higher education, if you will, doing music technology in Reading, and learning a deeper level gain structures, microphone usage, what EQ is and how it actually works, effects chains, MIDI, system exclusive stuff, synthesizers, software, how it all integrates, digital audio, analog audio, what those two different things mean, how they integrate with each other. Yeah, so that's where I landed, and obviously we've kind of talked back into that point. But I feel like a lot of people in my industry were effectively kind of either failed musicians or failed superstar producers.
Yes,
But
and
then,
we're consciously referring to them, or at least I'm trying to, as former musicians or former. We're not calling them failed. We're just calling them former.
I was going to say the same thing. It's not really a failure because just because
Well, you
you
get a
end up
skill
producing.
set that prepares you for the thing, as you say, that you end up discovering that you're
Yes,
more
yes, very
attuned
much
to.
so. You I mean, there's a lot of like grand scheme thinking that leads you down that road. But once I figured out how to kind of um, build that thought process and think in a bit more of a broader view, then it became pretty clear. But I've always said that like I would sell all my equipment and start a new career or do something different if I found something that I had the same passion for or interest in doing. Not because I'd want to get out of the industry, but because I just I like being engaged in things that really capture my mind and capture my imagination, that challenge me, and I that I would do on my day off or my month off because we're in a slow period in the industry. If I do that naturally on my own time anyway, then that's probably what I would do. Um, so and yeah, I like this job. I spend all my time researching it and playing around with it, and well, not all of, but a number of my interests outside specifically this job also integrate with it. So
Okay.
playing with synthesizers, making music and stuff.
Well, you mentioned
That will,
you mentioned the word challenges just a second ago of having some of these challenges to overcome, and I think that's a good segue into our topic of conversation, which is going to be all about preparation. Um, so there's a saying we had in the military was that you don't earn your stripes when everything's going right. You earn them when everything's going wrong or
yes.
unplanned. Um, so I wanted to get into that with you. What kind of does preparation look like for you? How much interaction do you have with other departments? Are there any, if you know which shots you're prepping for, do you prepare a certain way? Just kind of walk me through the process for how you prepare for a project or different types of projects.
For me, it's actually a lot grander than just you're working tomorrow at this place doing this thing. My preparation for that job will be 3 years before I even know I'm doing that job. And by that, I mean, I don't mean like I'm some kind of crazy samurai that's tuned into the Zen and all that kind of thing. I mean, I spend an awful lot of time researching my equipment, spending a lot of time um, on my own, and quite often with some of my colleagues, experimenting, getting hold of bits of kit I either don't have or they don't have, or bringing bits of kit together to try out. But I spend a lot of time researching that, developing my understanding of it. I read manuals. I'll deep dive. I spend an awful lot of time discussing with my peers opinions on, the different tones of a preamp on a radio mic or different mixes or how they work. And in the last couple of years, I've slowly been able to develop relationships with developers of that kit, like yourselves, sound devices as well, where I can actually give feedback and request things and push to have stuff that I can use that I know will be useful. But for me, that's where it starts. That's kind of where my mindset is, because it's not necessarily about getting ready for a specific job. It's about making sure my basics are completely foundationally correct. Because when I'm on a job, I'm not trying to figure out how to use a piece of kit. I'm trying to figure out how to deploy that piece of kit. And by that, I mean, I don't really want to be trying to work out what a menu does or what a specific thing does. I want to know that already because I don't want to spend time trying to learn that. Instead, I want to spend time trying to deploy that. So that's where it starts for me. Building the kit, putting it together, testing it, playing around with it. And that's something I'm interested in as well. I have a lot of enthusiasm for it, and
So
I like the kit.
when you're talking about doing that testing and deploying the kit, are you testing and deploying in an environment similar to something you could foresee yourself using it in? So, or are you
Um,
testing kind of in a vacuum? How do you do some of that? I'll say pre-preparation when you look at your kit.
it's not a binary answer. You build up to it. It's like a plane doesn't just start and then it's in the sky. You run your way to it. So for me, it'll begin with looking at videos and then reading whatever I can on whatever piece of equipment has taken has grabbed my eye, grabbed my view, or stolen my attention for whatever reason. Going, oh, that's interesting. Let's look at that. Um, an example would be so Deity recently put out a slate in the last year, which was very interesting. And when I started showing that off, I was looking at that with keen eyes because at the time I didn't have a DigiSlate. So looking at that over, but then I've heard from other colleagues that there are certain things that have been missed out in the initial firmware. So then that leads me then to look at the manual and go, right, does it actually do that yet or not? Because if it does, then it's something to consider. If it doesn't, then it's not something I need to worry about yet. Or this will lead me to another decision to go get this DigiSlate from another manufacturer because it does this, because I want to have that. I want to spec for that in my workflow, or vice versa. I don't need that, so I don't need to worry about that. So I understand what's going on there. And then if I was then to buy that, I've already got a base understanding of its capabilities. So then you start the relationship of actually using the kit. Okay, the menu is here. This is this. You stumble your way through it in the safe confines without a producer or an AC looking over your shoulder. And I sometimes you get thrust with some new kit and you just have to figure it out, which to be honest, is quite fun. I quite like the challenge of learning things. That's part of this job as well, is being cool and calm under pressure and going after it. But I'm interested in the specifics of what we do, and the best way to get the most out of that is to know as many of those specifics as possible, to the point where that is your second nature. Um, Understanding that and deploying that then becomes a lot more. As I said, you're thinking about how to use it as opposed to how to use it, which is kind of a very similar sentence there. But the point is, you're not trying to work out what to do with it. You're just trying to work out how you're going to do what you need to with it in that scenario, because you know all the settings already, and you know the minute differences. Now, obviously, when you get on set with something, that doesn't mean that you're preloaded with every permutation of what can happen with it. Different sets, different scenarios, different locations, they all throw up things that you don't always understand or you wouldn't plan for, which is kind of the fun of it all. But when you have that base understanding, you can make those hyper tweaks, those detailed adjustments that can give you that extra 7 or 8% quality, because you understand why you're making those tweaks as opposed to just pressing buttons and going nuts. So that, for me, that's kind of where it starts. And
So
then when I
I'm sorry, just
please
to go on
uh,
that note, you made a great point about the extra 7%, 8%, 10%. So digging a little bit deeper into that, if you get some kit, what is the difference between, assuming trained hands, certain kit, and then say upgrades to that kit? It is it an extra 10%, 20%, 15%? What is that next level where you can use technology to really eke out that extra percentage versus, dare I say, unupgraded kit or standard kit?
it comes down to the context. So like the belts and braces, or the basics of this industry now, is everyone has a radio mic on them, and then you have a boom over them as well. But back in the day, before my day even, that wasn't really even a thing. You would put radio mics out on a special occasion, and the boom is king. There's a colleague of mine. would say quite often, Simon Hornet, little shout out to my buddy there. Boom is king. It rules the world. So you wouldn't necessarily think automatically to put a radio mic out. You would just think, how do I get a boom there? And then when the scenario comes that you cannot get a boom close there, that's when a radio mic would be there. Whereas nowadays, as things are moving on, you're exposed to those options, which is where the education comes in and keeping your eyes and your ears open, which I find I do naturally. And I'm not a unique case to that. I tend to find that I'm speaking to all of my peers and colleagues, and we all have the same, I call it the sniff, where someone will get, that's an interesting new transmitter, or that's an interesting new hoop on a mount. Have you seen that? And then we'll start talking about it. We'll start discussing the variables and the different things you can do with it, what options they would give you, what different scenarios I'd have. And of course, the classic, you don't need that. You can use this. But what about this scenario and that scenario? And then, 2 years later, there's someone who wasn't necessarily up on it. They would just rent one and they come back. I used it and I did it on this and it was great. And they won't tell you you're right about it, but they've discovered that option. So it's an ongoing thing. Obviously, I'd say a good example of that is radio mics, because we're in an interesting time for radio mics. And a good equation for that is camera being every 2 to 3 years, there's an entirely new refresh for camera. So the bodies, not necessarily lenses, but the bodies themselves, they're always upgrading and changing. And the industry is it almost seems to just, whatever was working 5 years ago, suddenly you'll be told that's not good enough anymore. It has to be the next newer thing. Whereas in sound, we had our primary thing are our microphones. And they haven't changed a massive amount over the last 10, 15, 20 years. My favorite microphone is the MKH50. And I think that was put out in the early 2000s, maybe the late 90s. I could be wrong there. But it's a relatively old mic now, but it's still, it's still out there doing immense work, because it's really, really good. But radio mics have gone through many permutations. They've changed and upgraded, and there've been a lot of facilities and workflows that have been added to them. They're incredibly complex now, even. But at the same time, some of that complexity has been taken out by how they work. A good example of that is, the Nexus series by Sound Devices. Everything can just be auto-tuned. It takes a picture of what's going on at the time and then figures out the best place to put your transmitters. And then it can automatically, you can group things together and shut things down and turn them back on to save power. All these different things happening remotely. Whereas, 10 years ago, you'd have to go up to someone, climb into their knickers and fiddle with it. And even then, that first fiddle wouldn't necessarily work, which is a really awkward situation. So it's, as the industry is we have the same problems, but as technology is moving on and the industry is reflecting that, it then gives you more options. So when those options come up, you then have to, it's good to keep an eye on them. And with radio mics, that's a pretty extreme example, because obviously, if you're like a drama mixer, you've got anywhere between 6 and 10, 12, even 16 channels of radios. Swapping that core setup you have that you built over like 10 years, swapping that out for an entirely new, modern radio setup, that's going to be, especially nowadays, that's going to be, more than the price of a deposit for a house. It's going to be incredibly expensive. So you need good had previously that we do need now.
I
And the industry is always asking, please.
No, just I think that's unique what I hear feedback on, especially from the audio world, which is you can add more tools, you can add more features, you can add more whatever you want around kit. But if it doesn't actually work or doesn't do, it's not about adding more features, it's about it's still got to work the way I need it to work. And the features have to provide value, not just there's this whole long list of, you get all this extra stuff. Because if, like you say, if I'm investing in that, it's got to actually bring me value almost day one, or else,
yeah, very much so.
Why am I getting it? Yeah,
it's got to be a difference between. A good example will be like onboard recording with timecode, for instance. Say you put out a couple of mics in a car and they're going to go off, and then the director or the AD specifically be like, okay, you've got to climb in the boot, and say, no, we don't need to do that. And then you explain to them, everything's already recording. There's enough battery for an hour and a half, as long as I can check it periodically. Everything's time coded together. We could just need to bring it back and ingest it properly for post later, to which there's tools to make that even simpler now. You're providing solutions to them on set, and they go, oh, okay, that's quite good. That's quite good. In which case, that application, it frees you up because you're able to free yourself from the chains of expectations from production, instead of them having to like create more space for you to climb in the backseat of a car or a boot, which I never recommend. Technology can give us a solution, so you don't have to be in the boot of a car anymore. You can simply you can deploy them with time-coded radios, send them off into the free world, and then come back and check them, which means they can then just get on with it, and everything can be tied together, and it's going to work. So then you're able to create more flexibility, which is providing things work, as you mentioned. That's kind of the name of the game now. I think it's a case of compacting down the options of things, but then also having more options within those, within that channel. I mean, a good excuse, or no, not an excuse, a good example, to be topic appropriate, I think, with Radius and the new mounts you guys have put out in the last year, the Rad 1, Rad 2, and what you're planning with the Alto, which I think is kind of an open secret at this point, but you've got the base mount, if you will, which a lot of us have now. But when the Alto comes out, we don't necessarily have to buy an entire new basket setup with an entirely new internal mount. We can simply add the Alto on, and it becomes modular, which means for myself, I would plan to use that specifically within my PSC rig, which is it's much smaller than my drama rig. Far fewer. Well, one case versus 6 or 7, for instance. Everything has to go in that one case. The one mic I need, the few radios I need, and the one inside rig I need. And the more that I can reduce the amount of changeovers between those rigs, the better that use of space is, because when I'm using that rig, I'm running all around London, or I'm on a documentary or a media shoot with Meta or Facebook, and we're going all around the country. So I'm not looking to have every piece of kit with me. And plus, when they just change their mind on the spot, we're going outside, being able to reach into my case and just smack some pods on, and off we go. And I know that I'm okay for low wind, and I've got some fur in my bag, which I can whip on within seconds. But then when we go back indoors, I can just take the pods off or take the fur off. And I'm not having to change everything over, which is what I've had to do previously with when you go to like an outside rig to an inside rig. You're then taking the mic, putting it on a new mount, or having a different mic on a different mount. You can minimize that. So we're getting more functionality and more use out of specific items, because we can add or you can, in a modular fashion, put these extra bits that give you more functionality from that, which then has a smaller footprint and is quicker as well, which is what I like. Because
and
quicker you can do
in terms
things.
of preparation too, as the topic, you're prepared for more scenarios with less kit.
Yes. So the resources required to do more work goes down, which makes you more nimble. It makes you more efficient, and efficiency is the name of the game. So, for instance, when I eventually add an Alto to my rig, that's going to be swapping out my my old Super Shield, but I know it's going to be quicker and easier to put those pods on, put the fire on, and go outside and do some documentary stuff. But it's also going to have a superior performance to the old Lyres, my current Super Shield, which is going to be better. But then when that transitions over to, for instance, my drama rig. So at the moment, I've got a couple of Rad 1s and a couple of Rad 2s specifically for my 2 Sennheiser MKH50s and my 2 Sennheiser MKH 8040s. So super cardioid and then a cardioid mics. I have one mount per mic. So when we're on set, as soon as we kind of get an idea that we might do something, even if we don't know we're definitely going to do it, in the background, as a background task, myself or one of the ASs will build those mics. I've got my setup in a way where building that is quite an efficient task for them anyway, but we'll build them ahead of time. And the way I do my booms and my radios and the way it all puts together, they can change that on the dime. So we've had a number of situations where, like shooting internally, we'll be on the MKH50, which is kind of the go-to mic. Very easy to find reasons to use that. But then you have reasons that you need a different mic, which are a lot smaller, but when they come up, and being able to just literally just switch on another mic from another mount, which is already pre-built with like a quick release, and the cables are put together, and you don't have to like deconstruct the radio because that's on a modular setup as well, which is what I have. Being able to just switch it around. So when they go, right, we're going to shoot this shot in about 40 seconds, they've just changed it. They're pulled out. We're in a big space. The 50's outside of its proximity. It's not going to sound good. Let's go to an 80-40, or I like to call it the beautiful average, because it's a shotgun and we're going to get an extra 1.5 foot out of the proximity on that. It's worth doing that because the super cardioids are already lost, that beautiful tone of having it. So the tone difference of changing mics in that shot will be negated by having the chance to get some extra juice out of that, and being able to just walk over to him from the car that's next to me, hand him that mic, and just wait with my hand out, because in 7 to 10 seconds later, he's going to put the other mic that he wasn't using back in, or he just put it in the boombox, ready to switch around. But literally, off he goes, ready to go. And that comes down to that functionality, which goes to my point of the radius and the alto. With the 50's, being able to just simply add the alto functionality into it, as opposed to then have to buy an entirely new rig for that. So then if we do have to do a shot, say, for instance, with where they'll open the door and someone will be talking and it'll be like half a page or whatever. Oh, hello, I've come round to kill your dog. Oh, fantastic, you're late. They open
I've
that
seen that
door,
scene
and even if
several
it's
times.
yeah, I'm here for Emmett. Even if it's a nice, beautiful, sunny day, there's always just that one little bit of, and the 50, it does not like the. So being able to just whip on those pods and take that away in that open door. But then if they decide to just go outside as well, or sometimes a director will just let a shot linger, and carry on, go, and the camera just has to follow. Um, Being able to just chuck a fur on it and follow that outside, and then you've gone from a rig that's set up for your indoor use, but in a matter of 15 seconds, you can go outside straight away. In which case, we're ahead of camera, which is always, you race a lot on set, and it's not necessarily, oh, we're ahead of you, but part of the game is to have the answers before the questions, and that's something that I like to call it smooth department. So when those situations come up, we've already seen that the corner's coming, and we've already prepped for them. So when the scenario comes up where we need that, well, it would be really good if we have this or that, or this tool. We've already got it prepped. It's on the cart, or it's even on a flexi grip with a grip, clamped to the boombox, ready to go. So my operators worry less about figuring out. My operators worry less about trying to get the right tool, and instead select the right tool because it's available for them. They don't have to think about it, which is something that it's an ethos I got from the old days of doing lots of low budget stuff, where working with an old friend of mine, he'd have lots of his kit in a box. And if I wanted to change a mic or add a thing that wouldn't be the usual standard, I have to call it, signing off the request sheet. I would like this mic, and then we'd have to go through okay, why do you want the mic? What are you going to do with it? Or is it better than what we've got? And all right, and if you can check off all the lists, then he'll take the bag off the box, kick the box over, we open the box, get out what we need, and it's a very long process. Whereas I like the concept of grab and go, remove as many points of distraction and hurdles between the operator and the task, so they have the right tool as quick as possible. So my ethos with my the guys I work with, the girls I work with, they shouldn't have to ask me to use a tool. Hey, it's my cat. They shouldn't have to ask me to use a tool.
She
It's always
agrees.
good to He,
He agrees.
uh, very gender appropriate. They shouldn't have to have the stress of asking me to use a tool. If they feel like they need it, it's good that we confer. I reckon this. What do you reckon? I reckon you're right. Before I've even said a sentence, the mic's rigged. It's ready to go. Or they're already putting it on because of the quick release modular setup that I've got. I want to take those questions away from them so they can go and give me the best results possible. And the less they have to think about that, the more they're thinking about how to then deploy that tool. Because when we're on set, there's so much stuff that's going on, and it doesn't matter how prepared you think you are. There's always going to be a curveball. So thinking less about how to rig the kit or trying to understand the equipment and thinking more about deploying that equipment, that's where my mindset's at, and that's what I'm kind of trying to point towards when I'm preparing, my equipment. And then of course we do come up to the traditional point of, okay, we're going to do a job now. Like, this is the scenario. At that point, it's more just a case of, you're at the restaurant and you're selecting from the buffet what you want to eat. So for instance, a job I'm doing in a couple of days, going to be running around with a bag, doing kind of like PSC docu style stuff, picking up interviews, vox pops with people at a large convention. And then that footage is going to be taken off, ingested, and then cut and then put out on a stream later that day. So it's about time code for that job. So the cameras we're using, making sure that they have the right cables for those cameras that can take on that time code. But then as a backup, supplying, setting up, and making sure that we have a DigiSlate available. So if that isn't working or the camera's not playing, they can just flash it. They've got the time code, and then the editors later can pull that together really quickly. And then having available the correct wireless mic, handheld mic, the boom mic, and the radio mics required for that, which is quite a low yield one. It's just a pretty standard package of a boom and 2 radios. But communicating with my camera department and the director that's going to be running the show, and making sure, okay, this is a scenario. This is what we can do. Because we were going to put wireless hops on the cameras, but instead the director was like, no, I actually want to do a time code. It's going to be quicker that way, because we can just bring your bits in and pull the bits out we don't need. So that's what I've spec'd for, but that comes from the conversations. But then, because I know the cameras, I've spent some time with them, but I've also read up on them, specifically the FX3, to which there's a 1-frame slip, even if you use the special time code cable. I buried my nose into the manual of that camera on a shoot where it wasn't going particularly well, mainly because an editor didn't know how to use timecode, which terrified me. The producers called me up later and apologized to me about that. It's not your fault. This guy doesn't have a full education yet. But my point is, knowing the variances of those. So, in that situation, running 2 FX3s that will potentially have a 1-frame slip, we'll also have a DigiSlate as a backup to negate that problem. And that comes from just burying my nose in a manual and going on the forums and reading up on it and learning about it and using these pieces of equipment and speaking to my colleagues as well. That's it's a really useful resource. Facebook and social media, there's a lot of negatives to them. There can be some problems that arise, but there's a lot of positives as well. And in this age where the time of like trainee schemes and apprentices, it's starting to come back. There's been a lot more effort to kind of rebuild that, especially after the 2021 rush where the industry went nuts and we didn't have the skills to supply the demand because there wasn't enough investment previously. But for a good period where there was a huge downturn in the amount of available trainee schemes and apprenticeships, official ones, versus the old days before I was in the industry. It was social groups, online social groups, and websites like JSW Sound, I believe. That was like one of the original places, but then that kind of expanded into some groups, like recording groups in America with Facebook. But then we also have like Film and Sound TV in England, and UK Sound Underground, which is the 2 big ones here. And a lot of the people who are in this, We get the skinny on the kit. We go super geeky. Everyone has a
Yeah.
big opinion on things as well, which is always fun to.
Well, it's there's a saying that, the guys at the top know 10%, but the rest of everybody at the bottom knows 90%. This is an organizational saying, and that's it. How do you get the 90% of the information to flow to the top so you can make really good decisions based on all information instead of just the 10% you see? And I think what exactly you say, like the communication has become wider and easier to access. Um, and especially if people are willing to share that information.
A good second-hand example of that, to invoke the great name of Simon Hayes, he's quite often quite open in the fact that he says, "Look, I'm not a technical genius with the kit. My skill set and my value isn't in knowing every piece of kit inside and out." Now, obviously, he's the head mixer, and he knows way more than he gives himself credit for. He's incredible, but he doesn't necessarily feel like he has to know every single thing because he has a team underneath him that does that. And that isn't him being lazy, because while his team, so specifically Robin and Taz at the moment, previously it was Ben Jeffs that was in Taz's place, but they build those systems, and they set them up, and they iron out all the kinks, and then Simon comes in and deploys them and utilizes them. It's a team effort with that, but he doesn't necessarily have to know all those details, but he has a team around him that does. But then he's in the right position to do that, because then he's going off and having conversations that these other guys and in his group, um, they don't have to fight those battles. So then he's off negotiating with the director, the producers. We need this, and his team, Robin, Arthur, Taz, they will say, okay, we need these things, or this is the problem we're having. Can you go negotiate that? And it's a team effort. So it's a pretty good example of that 90% versus a 10%. He knows enough to do his job and give him the creative tools, to really put that final sheen, that final detail. Um, uh, but he has a good team underneath him that knows the nuts and bolts. And together, that you put those elements together and you have an incredibly effective team, because you're running also the political element of it, which is there's so much of that goes on behind the scenes on film sets. It's more than just plugging an XLR into something and then calling yourself a mixer.
Record,
You have
yeah.
to negotiate things.
Well, what you said before we got deep into these conversations on our pre-conversation, I think was really interesting. Back to all the preparation, the equipment.
I,
How do you figure out the equipment beforehand? You made a really good point. I just want me and my guys to be able to see with their ears. Like, that's what you want to worry about. And if you're stuck in your head dealing with equipment, dealing with issues, dealing with how do I technically solve this problem, then you're in your head, not necessarily seeing with your ears.
yeah. So if everything is set up correctly and you know what you're doing with that kit, your presence is on set. Your presence is on what's going around you on set. So the decisions are being made outside of our skill sets. What's camera doing? What's lighting doing? What's costume doing that's going to muck up our radio mics? How can we work with them to rebalance that? And if you don't know, for instance, that like a DPA 4071 has I think it's either a 6 or a 10 decibel boost between 4 and 6 kilohertz. If you don't know that, and then they put an extra layer of clothing above that mic, you may think, oh, that's going to be a problem for us. It's going to be muffled, but it won't, because you have that lift, and that's the right tool for that scenario. But then, for instance, like a COS 11 by Sanken, if you put that mic in that same scenario, it is going to sound quite dull. You're going to lose a bit of that sizzle, that upper frequency area where that dialogue sits, where you get a lot of the detail from. You'll lose that because that's not the right mic for the job. But then, inversely, if I'm doing like a PSC or an ENG documentary style job, I'm not necessarily going to go for that DPA mic that has that top sizzle, because I don't want to add emphasis to a lot of the stuff that's going around. And I'll work to make sure that the COS 11, which would be my choice for that scenario, has a chance to live. I like to say, get it up, get it out. Take that as far as you can do in whatever scenario you're in that allows for that. Further up and the further out it is, the cleaner that mic's going to be. But that mic has a bit more of a closed off sound, but because of that, you get a bit more isolation for those subjects. And on a drama set, for instance, you want your boom and your radios to kind of live together, and even intertwine, where one can replace the other in that scenario where it needs to. The tone and the sound is as open, and they match. Whereas on a documentary or a POC kind of thing, I I feel like it's actually better to do the inverse, because when you're on a location, sometimes you want that openness from the boom, but then there may be a sound over there that's being a problem, and you can't change that. You don't have control over real life. And to a certain degree in sets, you get that, but that's a far more controlled and constructive environment where you can actually have a say on it, but you can't stop that. So then you've got that other option with more of a closed source that's more directional for that specific person that's talking. So then in post, you have that option where they can open it up or close it up, depending on what's needed. And that's knowing the tool, knowing what's going to be right for that, give you that that choice, which then when you go out and do the job, with your clients, with your producers, with your directors, they're thinking less, they're getting less involved technically, unless of course they want to ask questions, which, bad habit, but I'll probably talk their ear off because I love the stuff. But then they see your enthusiasm about it as well, which I think is, um, that's something that I think a lot of my colleagues miss the point of, because there's the classic thing of, oh, there's a plane going over, that everyone has to stop their job and got away, and goddamn sound department, and of course we shout back, it's the location department, it's not a sound problem. And you get into that kind of negative inference, which isn't always very fun. But then, whenever we speak up, there's a problem, and they think, oh, sound speaking, there's a problem. Whereas I kind of discovered a number of years ago, I did a really nice mix on some short film, and it was a very fast moving set, and like most short films, resources and time are very, very in short supply. So you have to be super fast and achieve things very quickly. But I turned to the director and I said, "Did you hear that?" And like, what was the problem? Like, so, no, it wasn't a case of it being a problem. Did you hear the quality of that? Like the mix. My boom operator did an amazing job. They really found the tone, the moment, and that little, that little moment where the actor stopped and looked up, and you can hear just creak of the mouth, and that added emotional inference to the scene because they were trying to present something. It was just on point. And then when the other people start talking in the mix with the radios, and the radios were smooth and clean and present, they're like, oh, okay. And then they start buying into what we do, as opposed to just being like, oh, you're here and we just have to. Why are we spending money on this guy?
It,
Goddamn sound department. Just
that's
give
a
it.
no. It's a really interesting take on that, because over the years you listen for things, right? So you experience different sounds. And I'll give an example of like hair getting stuck in a lab mic. If that's your first time hearing it, you're just gonna be like, "What the heck is going? Like, I don't know what this is," and it's a random piece of coarse chest hair or something, right? Um,
Right.
no one points out the good necessarily. It's just like saying, like,
No.
even for sound, you're constantly trying to, like for us, we're trying to get rid of handling noise and wind noise. There's all sorts of stuff that you're trying to get away from and isolate. But once you've got it, if you don't kind of advocate for, that's it, listen. So now they know what you're almost educating the rest of the world on. That's the quality we need to be going for every time, which obviously increases
It's
awareness and value.
so it comes down to just positive enthusiasm for it. Because if you're trying to get someone to do something, they don't care. They don't want to do it. You'll get maybe one take out of them, but I mean, how many? I don't know how much time you spent on set, but it's a common thing where you dish out IEMs to all the important people who feel like they should have a medallion with earphones on it. Um, but for them, it's almost more of a look and a flex and actually listening to what we're doing. It's a classic thing of, oh, we got loads of comms out today. Let's make sure that our ship is sailing tight. The rigging is collecting all that wind. Let's go for it. But then look around, and after the first take, they're all on the table, and at the end of the day, you have to go and find the IMs, because some people have taken them home, some people have put them in their bags, some people have left them in the toilets, and you end up spending 2 hours trying to find these damn things. And then, of course, you have to have an argument with production about replacing the ones that get lost or broken. And then, like, why didn't you find it? Because it's only me and my AS, and we've got a million things to do. And you have to take a certain degree of self-responsibility, and I don't want to hear that, and that argument. Yeah, they don't necessarily want to be forced to listen to it, but the example I presented of that director, when I said, this is really, really good, you should listen to it. I didn't even say you should. I just asked, did you hear the quality? And then that positively infers them to interact and engage with the process, because everyone's looking at the screen. Everyone. It's a natural thing, and no one knows our problems because they can't hear our problems. But when you get a director, when you can infuse him and get them on side, and listen to what you're doing, not because you're forcing them, but because you actually educate them on the fact that we love what we do. And then when you actually hear something is really, really good, it's great, especially with quality of the camera work that's being done. When you got some Alexas and a good camera team on them, and it looks pretty much finished, you're like, Jesus Christ. And then you get the mix right with it, and they see the film like a glimpse of what it's going to be like when it's finished, and it's the performers are doing their thing, and it's such a rush. It's so cool. And when they have that moment, that's when they start investing in that. So they're already invested in camera because they're seeing it all the time. But when they hear it, they're like, oh, this is incredible. I want to hear these words. I want to hear this dialogue. Or I want to hear the ad libs that are taking place. And then they start investing in it more and more and more. So it's something I try to do now, and give more of a positive spin to our department, because it allows you to have a relationship with the director and producers as well. And let them know we're not grumpy, because I hate the whole cliche of, grumpy old sound guy. I love my job. I really do. And you've got to push me pretty hard to get me grumpy on set. Um, uh, yeah, it's a lot of fun, especially when you're working with a good AS or a good AS team who are absolutely kicking butt, and they know their stuff inside out, and they know what you want, and they can preempt your thoughts. I'd like go on my com mic and I know what you're going to say. I've already done it. Fantastic. I'm just going to talk about LFOs and synthesizers instead then. It's so cool when you have those moments and you can get to that, and you've got to build that. So
Well,
getting to that point is great.
I was to say on that note, we briefly talked about a particular example in where kind of the preparation and the teamwork kind of molded for a recent project you had. Could you kind of give us a setup for that? And then I think you're actually going to give me a clip to play after you kind of explain that scenario.
Yes. So 2021, I did a film that was then called Age, but later had a name change to Forever Young. Writer-director Henk Pretorius, with Dark Matter Studios. They had me join them for a couple of films that summer, which was a challenging setup, but it was a lot of fun. It was my first job working with Pierre Luigi. Why have I forgotten his surname? Sorry, Pierre, but Pierre Luigi. And if you know if you're integrated into the British part of the sound recordist, you would have seen him around. He's come up quite a lot. It was an interesting scenario in that 2021 was a gold rush, and as I referenced earlier, there was too many opportunities, and the investment hadn't been made previously to build the lower end or the build out our ranks in the trainees and the second ASs. So a lot of people were sucked up into higher grades and higher levels, and they were really ready for. But that happened, across the board in the industry. Camera, lighting, everyone found themselves in scenarios they wouldn't have been offered 2 years previous, because just, the work had to get done. So after trying to find an appropriate AS with a good amount of experience, I managed to locate and find Pierre, and he was just at that perfect inferent point where he had a good basics, he had some experience, not loads of notes, but a good amount. He's a good technician, and I brought him on, and he joined me on the film, and it was a bit of a rocky road for him to learn, because I have very high standards, and I warned him at the beginning. I'm going to push you, but it's going to be done with love. And when I'm done with you, you're going to be a lot better. But an example of that would be, as we were doing the film, we were actually starting to integrate music performances within the scenes with dialogue. And in a lot of those instances, we'd have maybe a day and a half, possibly 2 at the most, where we were given actually forewarning for that. And I was able to kind of say to the director, let's do this live. I can do this live. I have a good trust with my AS, and there's a real high pace, but we can make this happen. Anyway, after a number of those instances where we actually proved to the director that we can do it, we can go out and get it, immediately he was like, oh, this is great, you guys are really good at this. And that then brought us credit to then, in other setups following that, have a bit more interaction with camera, who were very good, by the way. Lorenzo was a DOP on that. He was a fantastic collaborator with us. And I say that not in the kind of the dirty word sense, but the actual realistic sense that we use, because irregardless of whether you're being paid or not in this game, like, we are all collaborators. That's the real application of that word. So we were able to work together on this particular scene that you'll see, where we have one person on a bed talking and another person walking around the room, having a long chat with her husband, and she's cleaning up while she's doing it. And it's a really big bedroom. And the old gentleman is sat on the bed, and he's kind of like throwing his lines over his shoulder, but he's not really moving too much. And in this particular setup, because of the budget, I only had one boom operator. And ideally, I like to get multiple booms on things wherever possible, be it a plant or actually having the beautiful opportunity to have 2, first and a second AS. That's always the ideal situation. But we didn't have that. But looking at that situation, it's a one-shot take, and with the old lady in the background walking around with the radio on, if that radio falters, then we lose that little moment, and then more editing work has to be done. So I wanted to get a boom over her. So we rigged a plant for our old gentleman, and I had my boom operator then follow the lady in the background. So if you watch the clip that we're going to play, 30 seconds or 45 seconds of it, or so on, you'll hear that there's actually 2 50s involved. One with the older gentleman sat on the bed, and he's just sat on underneath the microphone, which we rigged on a flexi grip on like the framework of the bed, and then my AS traced in the background with a long pole. The actress who's like going around talking about their friends gossiping and stuff, and we had to I managed to get a good boom mix without any radios on that. They were deployed, and they sounded good, but we didn't need them because we were able to utilize the resources we have. I know how to rig it with the flexi grip and the clamp, and give it a little watch and you'll see what I mean.
Okay.
This is godly awful.
You better get used to it. She'll be staying with us for a bit.
What? So I don't have a say in my own house anymore?
If you have a problem, you can always write to the newspaper and complain. Isn't that what old people do?
That's just rude.
You always said that you wanted a child. Well, now I've got you one.
Yes, but I wanted one with you.
Does that mean that you will be taking the formula?
Oh, I know what this is all about now. You're trying to force my hand.
Speaking of which, when will you be cutting the lawn?
When I get a part for the ride-on mower.
We do have a regular lawnmower too.
Kate Bush is giving birth to Marilyn Manson next door, and all you're concerned about is the grass.
Tell you what, I'll cut it.
What? What, you're gonna cut the lawn in the middle of the night?
So much energy.
Okay, Simon, so given your vast experience on these different projects, your years of filming, sound recording, your days as a musician, in music, failed musician, former musician.
Electronic musician, that covers it, I think.
Everybody's a DJ at one point in their life.
Oh, no. I never was a DJ. No, let's not go there. I'll get into trouble.
Well,
I have deep feelings on
You're like, don't start
people
that
pressing
rumor.
play.
So
I
just,
make music. I don't press play.
I think there's a new
Please
rumor
carry on.
coming out. If you could go back and kind of give younger Simon just getting started in this space, location sound recording, what advice would you give to him starting out based on the experience you've had?
First thing I'd say to me would be fight tooth and nail, get a big spade and dig whatever information was available at the time. So it would have been 2009, 2010, and go and become a trainee. Get into that system, become a trainee, uh, um, and that will allow me then to plug into that system. And the thing with being a trainee in this game isn't that you learn a lot about different scenarios and how to use kit, but it isn't necessarily about learning that, because I was entirely self-taught with that. And that's been a part of my strength in that, because no one taught me and no one coached me or brought me up into the game, I had to just figure it out. And that means I'm very, very strong at being a self-starter. But the thing that I'm missing, or the thing I was missing from that point in my career, that would have accelerated things for me an awful lot, I feel that I would have blossomed in quite well as well, is the network. And that is massively important in this industry. So to have a mixer, or a first and a second AS take you under their wing, on real projects with real credits, and you start by doing 3Cs, cables, coffees, and carpets. But you're always there. You prove yourself that you're absolutely committed. You love this, just by doing that, but just being aware, and you learn a lot of the real subtle things, the lessons of the politics of set, both being, around the front line, the trenches, as I would say, but also the negotiating elements, getting those really super important morsels of information of, like, this is how this job was coming, but I negotiated it by doing this, and I used this as my leverage, or I played the strategy by doing this, or speaking to this person and then coming back and giving the time, or pressing because, this time constraint allowed me to then make this happen for us, which then got this job. And then the relationships that come from that as well. You hear quite often how a mixing team or a well-established mixer, they'll pick up a trainee, but then, they're just blown away by them. Not because, they were thoroughbreds, but because on day one, they didn't know what carpets, coffees, and cables were. And by the end of the show, they knew people inside out telepathically, because they had a passion for it and a real love for it. And their eyes and their ears were open. They learned, and they were fantastic students. So they made themselves entirely valuable, to the point where the mix was like, I don't want to give you go up. I'm going to upgrade you, and I'm going to figure out a way to make sure you're on all my jobs, because you're an asset. That is what I would probably say to myself: get in on that line, so then I'm not looking to fill in that information later, which some of us have to. That's how my career ended up going. And as I said, there's a lot of strengths from that. The other thing I would say, kind of almost based around that as well, is trust yourself a lot more. Because when I did eventually start working for other people, I had no training and no formal induction into the industry. I just went out into the field and started recording with whatever I could get my hands on, be it, Zoom or plugging directly into camera. It was all about just getting the right mic as close to the source as possible. And quite in the beginning, I didn't have mics. I had to borrow them. Well, I'd take the onboard mic of a camera off the camera and stick it on a pole and just get it as close to possible and learn how to boom operate and make that work. But the point is, when I did eventually start identifying that I need to collaborate and start working with other recordists, and start getting my mind to that point of understanding that it's not about just me on my own, it's about my community and working within that as a team. That's where the power is going to be. That's where you're going to really grow. When I first started doing that and started working with colleagues and peers, I was shocked, not because of what I didn't know, but because of all the stuff that I taught myself and figured out on my own. Everyone else was doing, and a lot of them were shown how to do it, but I figured out on my own. And that isn't a flex. The point that I'm getting at with that is to trust yourself. So really look at things and learn how to analyze stuff critically. Go, why are we doing this? And it's not necessarily about you having all the answers. You can just do it in your own head. Like if you're with a mixing team, whatever it is, you don't have to challenge everyone. And being right all the time is the worst thing in the world. Being wrong is good. You learn a lot of lessons, man. You learn more lessons from that. But my point is, learn how to critically think and analyze and break down a situation and then rebuild it in your mind, which comes into what we were talking about earlier of knowing the variables as much as possible. And you only do that if you submerge yourself in them. And when you get to that point and you can trust yourself that you can create solutions, you don't find yourself freezing in those difficult moments of high stress, because we're expected to do miracles, especially in our department, because as I said, so few people listen to what we actually do. Everyone sees costume, everyone sees what camera's doing, lighting, you can immediately see the effect or the difference. But when we make those hyper tweaks on a radio mic that, we have to slow things down for and buy 17 seconds to make an adjustment, no one hears that. But we do. So having the ability to trust that and know the value of that, to push for that where it's appropriate, that's massively important. And don't be shy about it. And people respond to that. It's not a case of being aggressive. It's a case of confidence. And if you say to an AD, I got to do this, and like, no, you can't. It's like, this is worth it. And you say it, with complete confidence, then they'll be like, okay, I trust you. Go do it. Do a good track out of it. The ISOs. Good ISOs.
I think so. You said we got prioritize learning, prioritize collaboration. And when you say trust yourself and you speak about the confidence, and I think this plays into the preparation aspect too. One way I've heard it put is confidence comes with experience. So the faster you can get those first 10, 15, 20, 50, 60, 100 recording sessions down, the faster you'll have the experience to be confident how to do any particular job or different preparation. So that's it. It's trust yourself in the sense that you've just got to do it sometimes, because that's how you're going to build the confidence, is through the experience.
Well, an interesting point, just to tweak what you just said there, trusting yourself that you know how to do every job. I find it to look at it differently. It's not necessarily about knowing how to do everything, because we're not know-it-alls. It's a case of knowing that you have the capacity to build the solution. So you can be thrown like a curveball in the field and be like, whoa, what the hell is this? Or you want to do what? Or I've got you. Where the hell have you got that idea from? And we're not prepared for that. And then you pause yourself halfway through the sentence and go, hang on a minute. This is just another challenge. And we do, this is our department. This is what we do, challenges. Give me 3 seconds. I've got an idea. Let me check. I think I could do this. Let's go do this. I've got an idea. If you can just move that for me, or give me the space, or give me 1.5 minutes to re-rig something that I've got, in the case that's ready to go, that I didn't think I was going to bring with me, but I decided to anyway. But now we're going to deploy it because I'm ahead of the problems and I have the tool that it just wasn't being used, but now it will. Then you create the solution. So again, it's not a case of being a know-it-all. It's a case of just knowing as much as you can do that we have control over. So we're in those situations where we don't have control, where we can create conformity and structure out of chaos. That's the magic, and that's what ends up getting results.
Nice. So I will end on that note with you and flip it over. I've asked you a lot of questions, given you a chance to talk. Is there anything you'd like to know from me, from us, from Radius, or have any questions for me before I let you go?
So many questions I'm going to have, but I'll be poignant and more focused. One of the things I'm looking at the moment is adding cross-grading from, or upgrading from, my old baseball solutions that I would put on my MKH50 and my MKH 8040. That solution was good for the time. I actually ended up with one of the prototypes when they were first made. Myself, Guido Lerner, Mark Andrews, we managed to get hold of you guys and push you to send us some early versions, and they were deployed fast. But there's the ones I've got, they've been well used, they've fallen apart, I've had to glue them back together again. And the Nimbus, which I've got for the MKH50, which I like very much, but it has a very specific use case of big fast swings, or just in front of an open door which goes outside, where you don't need a full basket, but also a sponge or a baseball isn't quite enough wind coverage. But for general usage indoors, I would like to know if there's going to be, say, for instance, a radius cricket ball that's going to be able to fill that gap, hopefully with some tweaks to the way the original one was, slightly upgraded, and will be easier to use. For instance, pulling it on, having some kind of lip or grip that we can do that and put it onto the mic. Will Radius have an idea for that?
I can tell you, yes, there are actually a few different design ideas out for similar solutions, but there's some caveats to that. One, we've got the mini alto coming out that's going to slip on top of the current rad mounts. It's going to be very acoustically transparent. Hopefully, most people find that very low profile, so they won't mind using that to potentially boom indoors. So in some situations, the mini alto is going to solve some of that boom swoosh problem. We have to wait and see what the next levels of solution need to be, because we've got the Nimbus for a certain amount of wind noise. We've got the mini altos planned for obviously a little higher level of wind noise because they're full size blimps, or they're full coverage blimps. Then we'll have the bigger full size blimps. You can add layers of fur. Then it's back to, now we're talking about these specific solutions for specific mics. I can tell you we have some designs on the drawing board that are going to be very transparent, very lightweight, that I think would work great in that situation. And then they even have the option to add on some fur possibilities to that. It's a wait and see right now. We've just got so many new products that have to come first, that the next level is a wait and see when we can
we're all anxious. We're all going to bite your hands off to get these things, but it's well worth the wait because the things are coming to a high quality. But I would like to encourage you to look at that and address that with like a newer, upgraded version of that. My reason being, I'm planning to get an alto. There's a number of uses when that's available that I'm planning to get 2 of them. Especially because they just add on to the mount, which is excellent. Again, we discuss it. My point though is the one word there, weight. The alto I'm not expecting to be heavy, but for indoor use, having a basket all the time, I don't necessarily think it's going to be the way. But then having that step down, because we don't necessarily need the higher level of wind protection, but we still need that stopgap between the stock foam for like a 50 or an 80-50 or an 80-40, a stopgap between that and a fur or a blimp. I think that fits nicely in there. To which I think it would be used an awful lot. It would be kind of almost a standard, and then you take it off when you're in a situation that's more extreme. But then again, the modularity of it is something I really like, because we don't have to think, we have to get another mount out there. You just add it.
It's interesting too, and what we see kind of 2 years down the road and then working backwards. So looking forward and seeing that we're coming out with the mini alto, but first we have to build them out. So we have to make sure that the hoops perform in a certain way, because we know we're going to cover them up. So, we were already thinking forward at having a really soft suspension with the blue hoops, knowing we're going to have this blimp that's going to go over that. So you can have a very soft suspension with full coverage that you can use indoors. This is kind of that situation, because when we look at the options for this, we need the mini alto to come out first. You mentioned we're even looking at the possibility of leaving this. If we did a solution where you could actually leave on, right? So this solves that problem, but then the small enough profile where you can actually pop the mini alto on top of that. But we have to, because there's some people who will use foams and then just pop the blimp over the foams for a quick indoor outdoor.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So, this is the thing.
So this is
want to do that, but it is people do that.
If it's transparent enough that we're not, muddying anything up along the way, it's this workflow process that we literally sometimes deploy a product and then have to just go sit there and watch, and then just go, okay, what's happening?
I
How
very
are we
much like
using it?
that. I very much like that you're considering having it all fit together, because there are instances. I mean, I'm not a fan of leaving the gag on when you put a basket on a mic. You don't need it. You're just adding another layer of muffle to the mic. And the whole point of putting a basket around something is to actually get extended clarity with a higher degree of wind resistance. But there are situations where you do have insanely high wind that it's actually fortuitous to actually leave a gag on. But those are like very extreme, like running around in Wales with nothing stopping the wind between the mic and whatever's going on.
Doing that dock over Snowdon.
Yes. So actually, the idea that you guys have there of making it all fit together nicely, that's something I'm very interested in.
Yeah,
I think there'll be a lot of
and
applications.
it's the trade-off, as with everything. Back to size, space, how big we make it. How is it actually going to be used on the mount? So we've got to look at the mini alto, look at the hoops. We're already looking at iterations of things to come. So we're kind of forward compatible with products, and then also making everything backwards compatible too. So we still want that, as you mentioned earlier, everything to work together, not to have to buy whole new full complete kits. But the short answer is, I know of exactly 3 designs that we're actively looking at now. They're on the drawing board. They haven't been officially prototyped yet, but I could see those being prototyped later this year. And then,
well, when it comes, I offer myself. I offer myself as tribute to assist with any prototyping that you would like some feedback on, if you wished. That sounds great.
We'll probably take you up on that, and if you don't mind us standing around watching how you use it, like, we're just in the background here watching. Don't mind us.
That could probably be arranged depending on where I am and what I'm doing. Yeah, I think that could be a thing.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Simon, for having this interview with us. Thank you for all the information, sharing all your insights. And again, if there's anything you need in the future, let us know. Otherwise, we will catch you next time you're on set testing out some of the products.
John, it's been an absolute pleasure, sir. It's been great to talk to you, yourself, the rest of the team at Radius. I think you guys are doing fantastic work. Simon, is it Odie? A number of the names there that I've had a chance to talk to.
Yeah, Simon, Odette, Megan.
Yeah. Odette, yes. And Megan. Yeah, you guys have always been great. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot, Simon. See ya.
See you later, guys.